Boa tarde a todos e todas.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, you all. Estamos muito felizes de ter todos e todas vocês
We are
novamente
very
conosco.
happy to have all
Agora,
of
para esse
you
segundo
together
dia de
with
seminário,
us
segundo
now
dia
for
de
the
seminário
second day of
internacional,
this
trajetórias de sucesso
international
escolar.
seminar.
A gente queria agradecer a todos e todas que estiveram conosco ontem, na terça-feira, no dia
School
15, e que
Success
conseguiram acompanhar
Pathways. So I'd
o
like to
nosso
thank you
painel de
all who
abertura,
have been together
que
with
teve uma
us the previous
repercussão muito
days
boa,
and who
justamente
could
por
keep
todos os
up with
temas que foram
our
abordados
opening
durante aquela discussão,
panel,
que
which
trouxe
had
para cada
lots
e
of
para cada
good
de vocês que
repercussion
estavam nos
given all of the
acompanhando,
themes that we addressed.
quais eram
And
as
that
raízes
brought
desse
to
fenômeno
all of
chamado
you
cultura de fracasso
the
escolar.
roots of
Então,
this
hoje a gente
phenomenon called
retoma esse
school
contato.
failure
Estamos
culture.
todos aqui
We
para esse
are
segundo dia de
resuming
seminário
our
para
encounter
justamente
today in the second day of our
cada
seminar
uma das
to be able
experiências
to
que, de forma
elaborate on
bastante
each of
exitosa,
the
conseguido
very
construir,
successful
conseguido
experiences that
proporcionar
have been
trajetórias de sucesso escolar
building
para
this
cada menino e cada menina.
trajectory, that
Então,
have
assim
been
como sempre,
providing
desde
that
ontem viemos falando
success
para vocês, vamos
story.
ter
So as we have
hoje
been
e
talking
amanhã
about since
workshops
yesterday, we will have
específicos
today and
através das
tomorrow
quais vamos
specific
compartilhar com vocês
topic
experiências do Brasil
workshops
e também experiências
in
de
which we
outros
will be
países da América
sharing
Latina
Brazilian
e do
experiences and
Caribe,
also
em
experiences
que
from
vão
other
estar sendo
Latin American and
compartilhadas
Caribbean
práticas do
countries,
dia a dia
where we will be
levadas
sharing
e
everyday
proporcionadas e
practices
apoiadas pelo UNICEF em parceria
which
com
count
governos
on UNICEF
municipais,
support in
estaduais,
partnership
governos
with
nacionais,
municipal,
organizações
state,
da
and
sociedade
federal
civil,
governments,
organizações também
as well as civil
de
society
outros setores,
organizations,
como também o setor
including
privado,
organizations from
outras
other
agências da
sectors,
ONU e
including
tantos outros
private
parceiros que
sector and
vão
other
contribuir
UN
para, de
agencies,
fato,
and
garantir
also
o
many
acesso à
partners who have
educação, a
actually
permanência
uh,
e a aprendizagem desses meninos e
pitched
meninas.
in to
E para
help
quem está
to
chegando hoje e
contribute
não pôde
to
nos
the
acompanhar
education of
ontem,
these children.
sejam todos e todas
To those of
muito
you who are
bem-vindos e
coming only
bem-vindas. É um
today, who
prazer
couldn't be
ter
here with
você
us
aqui.
yesterday,
É
you
muito
are
bom a gente
welcome. It's
contar com
indeed a
pessoas
great
que,
pleasure
mesmo
for
não
us to have
tendo
you
tido
here, and
a
it's very good to
oportunidade de
rely on people
participar
who
conosco ontem,
may not
agora
have had
se
the
juntar a
opportunity
nós
to
e
participate
subir ao
before,
barco
but
e estar
now
a
you
bordo
have this
exatamente
opportunity
dos
to
dias que
hop
prometem
on board
hoje para amanhã
for these very
compartilhamento de práticas e
promising couple of days
experiências
we
e
have today and
discussões.
tomorrow, in which we'll be
Para a gente
sharing
entender um pouquinho
practices,
onde é que a gente
experiences,
está nesse
and we'll
momento,
have
eu
lots
queria
of
então
good
recapitular
discussions.
algumas coisas do que
To
a gente
bring you all
compartilhou
to the
ontem,
same
para que a
page, I'd
gente
like to
possa
share with
então
you some of the
entender melhor, se situar melhor em relação ao que nos espera hoje e amanhã.
thoughts that we
Esse
shared
seminário
yesterday
foi
so that
apresentado
we
ontem,
are on the
foi
same page in
realizado
order to
pelo
look up
UNICEF
to
no
the
Brasil,
events in the
com a
coming 2
correalização da
days.
Flaxo Brasil
This,
e o apoio da Porto.
this seminar is
Lembrando que
being
são
supported
todas essas
by
três organizações a
Flaxo and
construção desse
Porticus
seminário. Houve
together
várias
with
mãos,
UNICEF, and
várias
it's
cabeças,
actually
não só
put
pensar,
together by
mas também
many
trazer, propor
minds
experiências,
who
propor
contributed
temas, propor várias
suggestions,
das formas
experiences,
que
and
levaram a
themes
nós a construir essa agenda.
in many of the
Nós
elements that
contamos
helped us
também
put
com a
this agenda
participação do
together.
nosso
We also
escritório
had
regional
the
do
participation of our
UNICEF,
UNICEF regional
nosso
office
escritório
located
regional
in
para a América
Panama,
Latina e
as
Caribe.
well as
Deu
the
todo o
Latin
apoio
American
que
and
pudesse
Caribbean
também,
regional
nossa atuação mais
office.
direta com
They
experiências
provided
da
a lot of
região.
support in order to help
Por último, porém não menos
contribute
importante, contamos com a grande
experiences from the
participação
region.
também de vários
And last but not least, we had the
nacionais
participation of many
do
of the
UNICEF em países da
UNICEF
América Latina
national
e do
offices
Caribe.
in
Vou citar
countries
só alguns
located
deles:
across Latin America
Paraguai,
and Caribbean.
Cuba,
To mention but a few, Paraguay, Cuba, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, and many others who have been helping us to put the seminar together, whose main objective is to share the work that's being done around this concept of school failure so that we can help clarify the roots of these phenomenon. And with all of the players who are focusing on providing public services, who can help in the education of these children, even in the face of these major challenges which have been potentialized by COVID since last year. Much of what we discussed yesterday brings forth a big warning for educator players, particularly looking at the more vulnerable populations, looking at all of these markers which are involving the supply of this education. So when we look at the more vulnerable populations, and now we're talking about boys and girls and situation of social vulnerability, blacks and children and indigenous children, children with disabilities who live in remote urban areas. Even if they live in urban areas, they're in the periphery of these cities. So we're focusing on these boys and girls, and this is why we've been discussing actions and looking at the work that's being done and looking at innovative ways in which we can provide and ensure successful school trajectories to be connected with the trajectories of these boys and girls. So, addressing a little bit of what we have already been doing as a seminar and we intend to do today and tomorrow, I would like to welcome you all who are with us today. Once again, I'd like to remind you all that this seminar is being transmitted through 4 links, which are made available through Brazil UNICEF YouTube channel, so that you can share that with the audiences you consider to be interested in joining us. So join the UNICEF website, look for the seminar page, and that will allow you to click on the link. Or you can go to YouTube and do a search on UNICEF Brazil. You have access to our channel as well as to all of the other links which are made available. This live transmission in Portuguese also includes audio description. There's a second link in Portuguese as well with LIBRAS, which is the Brazilian Sign Language, a third link with Spanish language translation, and a fourth link with English language transmission. So this is one of the assumptions we wanted for this seminar. We have secured that by means of these possibilities. So I'd like to express our gratitude to every professional who is behind all of this exercise to put this seminar together and allow us to transmit these messages to the biggest number of people. As I said yesterday, this seminar, 1 year ago, it was being conceived. Actually, it was a year and a half ago. It was being initially conceived for in-person attendance, but for the obvious reasons, we know this is not possible now. But I believe that we can reach even farther by acting online. We can reach people who would not be able to be in person with us otherwise. So we also kindly ask you to share access to this seminar with your entire network of professionals who work with education or who support education somehow, so that they join us in this discussion. We invite you to feel free and available to share your thoughts, your ideas, your comments at any time. Please use our chat box. We had a lot of success in the chat feature yesterday, and we want to do it today better and more. So feel free to join us through whichever link you're connected with. Ask questions and make comments through our chat feature. And now, addressing what we have for today, I'd like to say that this is something like a window shop, a major window shop where we will be looking at successful experiences from the countries with which we are working in order to put the seminar together. So let's start with some experiences from Brazil, from Ecuador, from Argentina. We'll also share experiences from other countries, and you will have an opportunity to get to know how this school failure culture is actually being fought, so to speak, by many areas in our region. And we're also going to have this workshop chaired by Julia Ribeiro, who is the UNICEF officer in Brazil. And this first workshop is going to be dealing with remedial programs, the ones that are concerned with the experiences and the education of those students, who will understand what this term actually means and what these experiences have been, the experiences that have been developed in those countries, to face or to fight the causes of those discontinued trajectories, or the so-called school failure culture. And then, after some 60 or 80 minutes, we will have a second workshop. And that will be sometime between 4:30 p.m., that's Brazil time, which is UTC -3, all the way going to near 6 p.m. So that will be the second workshop, which is going to be addressing the experiences related to hybrid education and distant learning, remote education. Looking at the context where we are today. So we will be able to see how these many actions have been implemented both in Brazil and outside, and we will try and understand how we can actually provide many of those actions given the limitations we may have because of non-attendance, non-in-person attendance to the schools. So those major themes in our workshops will be the object of our discussions in this afternoon. Once again, we are very happy to have, I think, more than one people across the 4 links, so we are thankful for your participation, and once again, please feel free to share comments or questions. During these 2 workshops, initially the one on the recuperation and ensured learning, access and permanence, this is going to be, as I said, mediated by Julia Ribeiro, who is the Education Officer for Brazil, UNICEF Brasil office, and the experiences that are going to be shared by means of this link that we are talking to you directly here. So each of those experiences will have 15 minutes for the presentation. After those experiences are presented, there will be a chance for debate. Mediator will be talking with the people with the experts who share their experiences, but also with those of you through our chat feature, through the questions and comments that you make. The second workshop, which is going to be mediated by UNICEF education consultant in Brazil, Juliana Sartori. That's going to be addressing remote education, hybrid education during the pandemic times, and this is certainly going to follow the same dynamic, 15-minute presentations and then a debate open to everybody. So I will stick to these words I have already shared. Once again, welcoming you, and we will now start the second day of this seminar, which is certainly going to be as good as the first day we had, and as good as tomorrow's last day. And there are a few surprises in store for all of you. So I'd like to invite now to the screen so I can share the microphone, so I can actually give the floor to my co-worker Julia, who is going to be chairing this workshop. Welcome, Julia. I cannot hear you yet.
Olá, agora?
Yes, there you are. So, I apologize. Good afternoon, Sydney. Good afternoon to each and every one of you who's on the other side of the screen. Actually, all of us are on the other side of the screen. So, thank you for being here with us in this very pleasurable afternoon of discussions in what concerns ensuring the right to education, because this is the theme of this panel. When we speak about programs for recovery and to ensure access, permanence, and learning. We'll have the joy to have an experience that has been developed here in Brazil with our support by UNICEF, together with 8 different states. One of the states is also going to be presenting their experience. We'll be sharing their experience, and our strategy is to actually give a name to this seminar. School success trajectory. During the panel yesterday, we talked about dignified trajectories or dignified pathways. We're actually trying to ensure that these children who have access to school, once they have that access, they'll be ensured effective education by means of the learning process, by rethinking curricula, specific curricula, and their participation, so that this school starts to make sense in the lives of those boys and girls. I will excuse myself now, so I will leave you on the screen, and all of the other participants who are going to be sharing their experiences. Yes, thank you, Sydney. I just was very happy. I started to talk, and I was very happy to have you with us. Okay, well, I hope you enjoy it. Yes, I got very excited about having Sydney with us, and I started to elaborate on the panel theme. So I will resume some of those aspects. We'll have the experiences of two countries: Brazil experience, Ecuador experience. That is going to be shared with all of us during this afternoon period. As I said, we're talking about programs which are geared to ensure the right to education. We're talking about access, permanence, and learning. And this is how we will effectively ensure the right to education by having ensured access so that they can then remain in the school, and also ensuring that each child and adolescent have ensured learning. Concerning the experience in Ecuador, we will listen to the experience which ensured access to education for boys and girls who have the situation of vulnerability even across these pandemic times. So both in-person and online access to education. So we'll have an opportunity here to talk to co-workers from our Ecuador office who will be sharing this experience with us so that we can all reflect upon the experiences and the challenges we also have here in Brazil. I would like to be telling you now what the scenario is. So, considering that we are still going through pandemic times, in Brazil, schools are partially closed, which actually is a situation that varies between states and municipalities, and in Ecuador, the current scenario. So I'm bringing forth these two experiences because these are the two experiences that are being discussed right now in Ecuador, where schools are totally closed. All schools are closed. And in order to discuss this theme concerning the school failure culture, which is understood by us here in Brazil, concerning issues related with repetition, school dropout, repetitive repetitions, which result in school delay. We refer to that as age grade distortion. That means a student who is lagging behind for 2 or more years behind the grades which he or she should be attending. So there's an ensemble of studies that point at the following fact: multiple repetitions contribute to school dropout rates. And these repetitions or failure happen when the school fails to be interesting for students. The PNAD data in Brazil from 2019, before the pandemic, those data point particularly at the boys and girls who are growing a bit older when they are 11-year-old or more. One of the reasons they say they are not attending school is because, as they say, school is not interesting. So it's very important for us to have this discussion around this culture that's going to be presented by Erundina about the strategy and Neurizete about the specific experience in Amapá, telling us how that is developed with an eye on developing curricula and to ensure learning and to involve students in a more participatory manner in these moments, both in terms of building a curricular and participating and engaging in the various activities. Then we will have the Ecuador experience, which is going to be looking at access and permanence. Because during these pandemic times, and I am sharing Brazil data now, because I have more access to those data, the PNAD data, COVID, November 2020, those data pointed at the following. We had more than 5 million children between 6 and 17 years of age in the country who, at that moment, had the right to education. that right was denied them. So it's crucial to think about schools that are now providing remote activities and which are resuming in-person activities in order to review the curriculum, in order to review the education that's being offered. And even if that happens in person, to look at having those students remain in school, not break up from the school, because that is going to have repercussions in the school system in the coming years, because we're obviously going to be feeling in all of our countries the effects of this pandemic for a longer period of time, for a more extended period of time. For the Latin American and Caribbean region particularly, the number of students outside of school, that's a very high number, that's significant. Even before the pandemic, we had something like 10.4 boys and girls who were in situation of school exclusion. And during this pandemic now, the process has warned that the connection with the school have become weaker, and that calls attention to the fact that we need to develop actions that will seek to ensure those boys and girls will remain in school, that they will remain being educated, or even looking at the development of effective actions that will very briefly identify those boys and girls who are not attending school so that they can quickly come back to school regardless of the way in which school activities are taking place now. And in order to start our reflections about the different experiences to be shared around this table, this panel, I'd like to invite our co-worker, Erundina Barbosa. So she can tell, hello, Erundina, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm fine. What about yourselves? So we're inviting Erundina so that she can tell us at least a little about the strategy of this school success strategy. Erundina is a mathematician. She's got a PhD in education from the University of Brazil. She's currently a consultant for UNICEF Education, where she coordinates this school success strategy. So welcome, Erundina. Please tell us and share us the experience you have. Julia, good afternoon. And as I greet you, I'm also greeting all of the other workers, co-workers who are not here with us yet. Fernanda, Niorizete, and Maria Fernanda. I would like to also greet our co-workers who are implementing this successful strategy in the different states, and also the people who are on the other side of the screen following us through YouTube. So it is indeed a great pleasure for me to talk about this school success strategies. I will allow myself to share this PowerPoint presentation because I think it is interesting for us to look at some of the details in this strategy. So let me see if everybody can already see my PowerPoint presentation. Not yet. And what about now? Still not yet. I'm already sharing it. Can somebody from the technical department help me or tell me what the problem is? Yes, it is already working, so you can start, Anantira. I would like to start our talk by talking about what this school success trajectories is. This strategy is a UNICEF initiative together with some partners. I will be talking about those partners further. To fight this school failure culture. We refer to this culture as such because it is indeed one of the main causes for school exclusion in Brazil. When I talk about the strategy or when I talk about fighting this school failure culture, I'm talking about the cycle of exclusion, which compounds repetition, dropout, and age grade distortion. We know that in Brazil and in other Latin American countries, repetition has been used as a learning strategy. Actually, we refer to that as exclusion cycle because boys and girls who are attending school, they fail, and they fail many times, and they are eventually within this age grade distortion bracket, and in that condition, the biggest tendency is that they drop out of school. So this is why we talk about a cycle of exclusion. We are well aware that those students who are in age grade distortion, they are the most prone to drop out of school, and they're also more prone to be victimized by violence. They are more prone to join both early and precariously in the jobs market. Now, why do we refer to that as a culture of school failure? Because, indeed, this ensemble of indicators, they actually compound a whole lot of beliefs and preconceived ideas and practices, which will turn that factor or that phenomenon as a second nature. It becomes only natural for them to repeat or to fall out. So this strategy is looking at providing support to states and municipalities to help them define and actually prepare proper evaluation for policies and proposed projects that are looking at overcoming this school failure culture, particularly fighting this age grade distortion. And we consider that the complexity of this problem, that the complexity of this culture of school failure require integrated and coordinated actions at 3 different levels of management: at the level of teachers, at the level of classroom, at the level of school network management, and also at the level of the school management system. The strategy starts from an analysis of the problem. To help us understand this that we refer to as a culture of school failure, we need to understand the age grade distortion data, also data referring to repetition and dropout. So we needed to know the size of the problem. In order to fight that problem, we looked for school census, and we tried to analyze those problems based on that analysis, which allowed us to put together this website. So I'd like to ask Sandra Tine and Julia Caligiorni to share this our website on our chat box, so you can have access to it. So we have an ensemble of panels in this website. You will be able to see those panels, and that allows us to understand this age grade distortion and repetition and dropout rates in Brazil, in all of the Brazilian states, and all of the municipalities, and also of every single state and municipal school. By means of these panels, if you want to know the situation of your school, you can actually access that panel and learn from this from these data. So, for instance, I want to know the situation of the school that's located near my home, for instance. It's possible. You can do that.
It was not enough to check this data. We wanted to deepen the analysis of the data. So we went to the bench, and we noticed that the age grade distortion, just to mention an example, is greater between boys than between girls. It's greater amongst blacks and mixed race or brown people, indigenous people, so it's greater there. We have this data analyzed by race, by gender, by location, geographical location, and all the data is represented in these panels. So knowing the data, knowing what the data that we call culture of school failure, and knowing some successful experiences in Brazil in fighting the culture of this school failure and of age grade distortion, we from UNICEF and partners decided to create the strategy. So the strategy is born from the analysis of the data and having input from successful experiences that exist in Brazil. Like, for instance, the project AJA or ACT in Mato Grosso do Sul state, other projects from the University of Rio Grande do Sul. The strategy is, in fact, an ensemble of recommendations from school managers, network managers, and teachers to provide guidelines for them to implement actions to face these issues. The recommendations or guidelines are divided into 3 booklets. They are also available at the site. The green one that you can see is for the teachers. The orange one is for school managers, and the yellow one is for the network managers. And the recommendations are subdivided into 4 stages. The idea is for these recommendations to lead states, schools, and teachers to build syllabus propositions specific for the boys and girls who are late in their schooling system. What are the stages? First, diagnostics, then planning, then adhesion, and then development. On the diagnostics stage of each of the booklets, we'll identify the data about age grade distortion, legislation, school resources, equipment, and community resources that may be used in facing the problem. We have to remind ourselves that when they go to school, they cease to be some piece of data. They're not figures anymore. They become a person. They become people that have a history, they have a trajectory. So the diagnosis goes beyond data collection. It is aimed at understanding what is the school trajectory of that boy, of that girl. There's a second stage, which is the planning stage. On this stage, networks and schools should elaborate their plan of action, building a pre-proposal of a syllabus in a participative way. It should have the participation of the teachers, of the school community, of the students, and this proposition should be flexible and adapted to the students who are in the situation of age grade distortion. Another stage is adhesion, or the next stage is adhesion or adherence, better said. So we should bring together the schools, partners, students, secretariats, social organizations, so to bring together and engage all these players, all these stakeholders, students, people who work at school, partners, everyone. And likewise, teachers should act in the engagement process of other partners, other players, and so forth. And lastly, there's the execution that we call development. So the 4 stages are part of the 3 booklets. So the 4 stages are in the steps of each of the 3 booklets. Brasilia is very dry. We have to drink some water. I apologize. I brought some of the recommendations of the strategy. Some of the recommendations depicted in the booklets. One of the recommendations I would like to draw your attention to is the regimen of collaboration state-municipality. We have the strategy being implemented in 8 states. When we have the alignment meeting, the meeting in which we talk with the state so it can adhere to the process, we stress out the importance of this policy, of this action. This was a territorial policy. And it's important for these states to consider being collaborative, not just in their state schools, but also in the municipal schools in the state. Another recommendation is to be intersectorial and to have partnership with the civil society. One of the problems of the school failure culture is that we have recommendations beyond the walls of the school. We have to understand that these boys and girls, which are late in their schooling process, they have processes that go beyond the pure education process. So we should have collaborations that would not leave teachers alone in facing the problem. Sometimes boys and girls are late in their schooling process because they have problems in establishing links with other human beings, connections. So the idea is to discuss how this connection process can be worked, not just family connection, but a connection with school. The idea is to keep our goal in mind. The goal is to help the children to reconstruct their school trajectory. We want the kids to be at school, but to be at school learning and developing, so that the school may be a means for them to rebuild their relationship with learning, and be part of their life process construction. One of our recommendations is the construction of a specific syllabus for them, because we understand that a traditional syllabus, school syllabus, does not take into account the needs, the interests, and also the expectations of the children. We think that the syllabus should be specific because it needs to be, for one, aligned with the national recommendation for a syllabus, so it's a nationwide process, but it has also to be aligned to the interests, the needs, the expectations of the children who are undergoing the age grade distortion problem. So it has to be a flexible proposition, but also a proposal that takes into account the perspective of inclusion and the multi-lettering perspective. Besides the competence of reading and writing, we have to work in the syllabus, specific syllabus, a perspective that may bring in different languages like physical language or corporal language, sports, leisure, technology, other kinds of languages. Another proposition is to listen, to engage, and to participate, or to have the students listen, engage, and participate. In the case of the age grade distortion, there's no one better than the teenager himself or herself. Tell us, what are their interests, what are their expectations, what are their needs? Another recommendation is that all these actions should be integrated and coordinated at the different management levels inside that territory. Another recommendation is the follow-up and constant reassessment or review, and the continuous education of teachers and managers. This is just an overview of the implementation of the strategy. Of the strategy today implemented in Sergipe. This was where we started. We have 120 schools there, 274 classes, and 6,800 students approximately. Also in Sergipe, this program is called Programa Sergipe na Idade Certa, Program Sergipe at the Right Age. The program is being implemented in Rio Grande do Norte. I'm not going to mention all the figures. We're starting to talk with Maranhão to have a Quilombola TSE. We have the Amapá program called Travessia Amapá, Amapá Crossing. The program called Trilhas or Trails in Paraná. We have the Follow the Flow program, Segue o Fluxo in Roraima. We have in the Amazon the TSE with the indigenous people. This conversation started last year, and we're going to implement it this year. At Acre, we have the program Learning is the Way. We have at the federal district the program called Attitude. And we're still discussing the program with the state of Espírito Santo. It will be called Trajectories. So, the implementation of this program is being carried out or implemented in the states shown on the slide. So, what are we doing with regard to follow-up and continuous education? The follow-up of each of the networks I showed you on the previous slide is done by a group of consultants, which are here on the chat. If they want to introduce themselves on the chat, that would be nice. This group of consultants do the online follow-up of all the state networks. We are doing now an education of managers and teachers with basic teaching on writing, planning, management, coordination, assessment of programs, syllabus proposal, and we have an ensemble or a suite of teaching experiences. We have 17 of them now already ready to make available to the network. So we also have a course of mobilization course for teenagers. What are then our next challenges? TSE is going to enter the UNICEF seal. So we're going to have it in at least 2,242 municipalities, or they're at least eligible for the implementation of the strategy. With the UNICEF seal, our target is to have a still not defined percentage of teenagers and children benefited by all these actions to face the school failure mentality. And it's related to the development of competencies and abilities by BNCC. The measurements will take place between March 22 and next year. The implementation of TSE, the construction of TSE and its implementation is a multi-person work or a multi-institution work. On one slide, I just showing some of the partners that are contributing with UNICEF in this implementation, creation, in the creation of schooling experiences or teaching experiences, in the education of teachers. We have Cidade Escola Aprendiz, of course, Porticus, Instituto Claro, Itaú Social, Flaxo, with us here today, Oi Futuro, and she's reading all the logos on screen. Instituto Conhecimento para Todos, Instituto Telos, the first two lines were read, and they somehow allow us to do a better implementation. Very dear partners we have here, which are partners that really took on the challenge to face the culture of school failure, are the state networks from Acre, Amapá, Amazonas, the Federal District of Espírito Santo, from Pará, from Maranhão, Rio Grande do Norte, Roraima, and Sergipe. In the case of Rio Grande do Norte, I have to mention Ongimi from Rio Grande do Norte. They took on the challenge to work alongside with us in facing this problem of age grade distortion. With this, I'll interrupt my presentation and give the floor back to Julia so we can talk a little bit more about TSE. Hello, thank you very much for this presentation. We are getting tips to talk a little bit slower. It's hard for me, I know it's hard for you, because we get enthusiastic about it. We want to say lots of things in a very short period of time. So, what I'm saying now is just for us and for the next speakers, and also to remind myself that I should do that at this moment, at the seminar. it is better to speak slower so everybody can follow. It is the moment of a great reflection, and this is a great movement. And we have created that with UNICEF. The idea is to have a look at the processes that make school exclusion to look natural. We have to look at the boys and girls who, because of the learning issues, the need to strengthen the connection with school, the need to strengthen the connection with knowledge, it demands from us to have a special look on these children, to make school more interesting for them, to make school more enticing for these children, so that they may create or take on these possibilities, especially to help them develop fully. The idea is to offer and to look to these children, thinking about the potential that they have, inviting them to build these syllabus together. It's very beautiful to see all these movements of the different networks along with us, building this program in a collaborative way. You saw that each of the states get a specific name for the process because it's their identity of the project for each of the states. And we'll have here the great pleasure and joy to talk with Neurizete, who is in charge of the implementation of this strategy in the state of Amapá. Let's wait for Neurizete to get to us. In the state of Amapá, the school success trajectory is called Campo Travessia. It means trajectory Travessia Amapá, yes, is Amapá crossing, or crossing Amapá. And the idea is to have this crossing or to recover the trajectory of the school path. So I request Neurizete to join us so that I, Erundina, and Neurizete can share the screen. Then Erundina is going to come back to us. Hello, Neurizete. Good afternoon, Julia and Aero. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a great joy for us to welcome you and to hear from you what you have to say about your implementation of the school success trajectory in Amapá called Crossing Amapá. So, let me introduce Neurizete. Neurizete is a professor of basic education for more than 30 years. She's an expert in school management. She works as Deputy Secretary for implementation of education policies. We have 15 minutes to hear your experience, Amapá's experience, and your opinion. Thank you, Julia. It's a great pleasure to be here to share this experience. I think Ero brings this suite of recommendations that UNICEF is presenting us the opportunity to do. And based on this partnership of this great contribution UNICEF is bringing to the state of Amapá. So we then start a construction process of this program that was named Crossing here in the state. I have a presentation.
Obrigada. In
2019, we had the only live contact in which we were all present. And then we started to talk and discuss the possibility to bring this trajectories of school success to Amapá. This Travessia program has been built during the pandemic, so it has been elaborated using the technological means that allow us to be here together in a meeting, albeit distant physically, to talk about Travessia. So it is born in the pandemic. And here we present you our logo, the logo of the program. It's learning at the right age. Travessia, learning at the right age. What does this message bring through this logo? We have a boat. The boat has many lines crossing. It's not just one line, it has many different lines. The word travessia, or crossing, also is with many lines. And the idea is to show that it is built with many hands. It does not have just one direction. It's a collective, participative process encompassing all players. And our boat, we are in the Amazon region. In the Amazon region, a great deal of our roads are in fact rivers. Great part of access is through water. So the boat allows us to go from one margin of the river to the other one, from one margin in which we welcome the boy or the girl, and then what do we deliver society? And this period they are under our care. They are under the project that is built along the pathway, which encompasses their permanence at school. What does this process delivers to the boys and girls? This is a little bit of where we are. Amapá is a state in the extreme north of Brazil. We have Macapá, which is the capital of this territory. We have 142,000 square kilometers. This gives us an idea of the size of our geographical area, and a lot of the access of people to schools is through rivers. About 40% of the territory has contact with the Amazon River. It's our sea river, as we say, given the size, the dimension, and the reach it has, and the possibility it creates, not just as a means of transportation, but also as a means to bring economies to life in the many regions. So this made us to implement a boat at the logo of this Travessia or crossing project. It's not just the time that they spend with us. What we produce and deliver society is also a perspective of identity, our riverside population culture. This is the scenario of the state network. What do we care for? This is the thought that we're bringing to you, that Erundina already brought us. It is an education challenge. And this is the side of the execution of what we do. And I'll bring a thought that Cleusa Repulho brought us at an event I was part of. I'm a teacher, so I've always been at school, never had management experience. And one day I was given a position of management, and I took on the challenge of being part of a project that has as its main objective to ensure public policies that will strengthen the learning process then you grasp a little bit of how big a state network can be. When we're just teaching in a school, we don't have the idea of all the complexity of the challenges on the field of education faced by networks of schools. We only see that when we go for the management aspect of it. So it's important to have the vision of the construction of the strategy and check also the execution part of it. The state network comprises 392 schools, and we come to a very specific trait of the northern region. Of the 39 schools, 150 are located in urban areas, and we have 242 of them located in rural areas. They are field schools.
Of those schools, we include 26 schools which are quilombola schools, 54 are indigenous schools, and we serve 114,000 students. And that gives us an idea of the challenge. When we look at all of the indicators presented at the national level, particularly the indicators that show this scenario of age grade distortion or school dropout, and these populations in the countryside, quilombola populations, indigenous populations, they present much bigger numbers. So this is an outlook on development. And here, Julia, I am actually trying to recall that I have to speak a little slower as we were instructed. Since yesterday, Ítalo has been telling us, has been sharing this challenge, so that we have to speak a little slower. We're all accelerated by the process of, lots of information to be shared. So, Julia, when we presented the word campo, that's a field, that's the countryside, it was the intention to show this travessia campo, this crossing to the countryside. That was a challenge to look at the countryside schools, the quilombola schools, the indigenous schools. So that is how we're going to be breaking down travessia, learning at the right age. The purpose is to take it out to the countryside. So this is why we're calling it crossing to the field. So this is our starting point. What allowed us to start building this Travessia program. Elo has already shared some of the challenges concerning Brazil, and now we are showing the challenges concerning the northern region, which shows all of the indicators. And in the state of Amapá, the scenario is even more worrisome. We have 37% of the students are in this age grade distortion group. So we're looking at what we can do in order to do for primary school and the final years. We had already two programs in place. One is Colabora Amapá Educação. The purpose of this program is to ensure education at the right age group for all children, at the municipal level and at the state level. This program has been adhered to the 16 municipalities in the state, and this construction of a major collaborative program that will ensure education at the right age, and that's geared for students from 1st to 5th grade, and we have this continued education strategy, which includes complementary teaching materials and pedagogical follow-up. So this network of collaboration that will ensure access, permanence, and learning to those children in the early school years. And the secondary school, we have the so-called schools of Novo Saber, which is new knowledge, which is a differentiated proposal for secondary education that will ensure learning. And the basic assumption is to ensure access, permanence, and adequate learning for each youth. So we had this gap of the final years, which was an option to work on the Travessia program for that group of students from the 6th to the 9th grade. So, in the state of Amapá, this is the challenge we have. We have to have an eye for those 37% of students who are in this age grade distortion condition. And in this process of constructing that together, according to what Elo shared with us before, those steps that involve developing a diagnosis and a plan, we have been able to achieve the objective of the Travessia program in the state of Amapá, which is to fight this culture of school failure, particularly the age grade distortion and school dropout for students who have been enrolled in the early years of the public schools in the state of Amapá. I'm sorry, her transmission has been frozen. We can still see the screen, but we cannot hear her anymore.
Olá, acabo aqui de receber que a Neurizete teve problema com a conexão dela, certamente
connection.
Ela vai
She is certainly
tentar
going to try
resolver aqui para que a gente
to sort it out
retornar,
so we can
com
return
a apresentação, a experiência
to her
e a forma
presentation.
como que
when she is sharing with us the way the Travessia program is being developed in the state of Amapá.
Eu queria trazer aqui para vocês,
what I would like to do now,
que Neurizete não está aqui,
in order to use the moments when Neurizete is not with us,
I
have received lots of comments on your part through our chat box. There is talk about the need, which is actually a crucial need, to break with structural racism that is given in our society, which is replicated in schools, particularly when we look at those boys and girls who go through these age grade distortion situations of situations of school dropout. Statistical data show that those are the more vulnerable populations, and they are even more vulnerable now during the pandemic, which is a population that has systematically been excluded. So this is one of the good points of the Travessia program, as Neurizete had been telling us. We see that this program tries to have a very profound look at these populations. So there is a focus on those populations. And here we have Neurizete back with us. I was just making comments about this perspective of equity that the Travessia program brings up concerning having this specific eye for the indigenous and quilombola boys and girls who live out in the countryside. So you have the floor again. We had a little power problem. Let me continue with the mobile data and let's see how far we can go. Now, this construction of the program I was telling you had that in mind. The perspective was to reach out to those boys and girls who have been somehow excluded, and often in our own schools. And what have we done this far in this construction effort? We have worked on a process of selection to develop diagnoses for the schools. First, we had to define a group that was responsible for the program in the Secretary of Education and to liaise that with the other sectors, to have an intersectorial network, to bring forth this collaborative network, because the school will never account for it on its own. There is a need to involve other agencies, the network of protection to children, so that we can actually ensure them their right. So we have liaised with this network of partners. We developed on the educational workshops, and what we present as the cherry on the cake, which is this active listening. Now, what does it mean to actively listen to all of the players who are participating in this great program? Those who are actually going to contribute to overcome this culture of school failure. We have to understand what they bring, what are the contributions they bring, to help build together, and that will allow us to see what makes sense, and the methodological concept and the pedagogical development, building this project, which is both political and educational, and it is also social because it involves many stakeholders. So this moment to actively listen is a moment that brings forth meaning to the Travessia program. And, as I said in the beginning, this process was built online during the pandemic, so it was developed remotely by all of the participants who have not had the possibility of having in-person encounters. So what we do now is we will share some of the records of these events involving our teachers, our educators, and our students. And that has allowed us to have some data which help us think clearly and profoundly about ensuring rights. What does this diagnosis bring forth? This culture of grade retention, where students accumulate failures, and they're often invisible in their classroom. And this process of listening, this is a very strong element, because the youth experience this process of exclusion in a very tough manner. Sometimes they say to teachers that the managing teams and society as a whole bring to them this condition in which they are a problem, that there's no solution for them, as if the responsibility was only on their shoulder. It's actually delegated upon them, and something which is actually a systemic problem. So this grade retention culture generates this mistrust. It breeds in these boys and girls this feeling that they are the problem. So that is something that has been shown to us by this diagnosis. Another point that came through very clearly through this listening effort was that this vulnerability experienced by these boys and girls in the region, which also includes migration, particularly between the countryside and the cities, the settlement regions, which generate this discontinuity of school flows. And that is done involuntarily most of the times. It's even forced. Students want to remain in school, but they're relegated to a situation in which they have to move. And we often fail to understand, we're not sensitive enough to understand that this problem is ours. It is not a student's problem. We have to look after ensuring this right to them, which is the right to learn, the right to have access the right to remain in school, the right to learn in a responsible and effective manner, to learn in a way that will help generate this project for their life, because those boys and girls are not numbers, they are actually projects of a lifetime, and they are under our individual responsibilities as well as our collective responsibility to go through the school process all along. And based on this diagnosis that was developed, we started to develop the methodological concept for the Travessia program. What did it need to add in order to generate this hope? And in order to make sense to those boys and girls, to those teachers, to those school managers, to that school, to that territory, to that community. This is something that needs to make sense, and it needs to meet the expectations. And it has to rely on participatory construction. The methodological concept was conceived within this perspective, which is to consider our curricular proposal, what are the possibilities for each stage of the process, and also to take this expectation into consideration, to consider the students' needs and specificities. What are the students' anxieties and expectations? And that has to be considered in as we develop this pedagogical proposal. This is something of what Alo shared with us, and we bring that to help us develop the program so that we can ensure that this expectation relates with what is proposed in our curriculum, so that we have a methodological proposal for the Travessia program that will really interact with all of those lives who are in a condition of age-grade distortion. So, Travessia program looks at developing a specific pedagogical project that will meet these needs, the needs of those students. So, Julia, can you just let me know whether you can hear me? Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear. And now you're moving on to the final part of your presentation, so we can progress with the other experiences. And you're speaking at a very good pace.
Julia, é porque está muito bem cortando aqui para mim.
Julia, what happens to me here is that the transmission is kind of intermittent. I cannot have proper return.
Mas fique tranquila, a gente está te escutando muito bem.
Rest assured that we can hear you loud and clear. Okay. So I will continue, moving towards wrapping up in terms of what we did to build this proposal, which included looking at each school class and each school children structure to work on setting up the Travessia project by organizing the school classes, looking at the local realities, looking at these students who are in age grade distortion between the 6th and the 9th grade. So we're trying to build classes together in which we would involve them in this construction. So it was from them and to them. So we have developed the pedagogical design. The project has been constructed. we now have the proposal ready to be sent to the State Council, because this is supposed to help build state policy that will ensure this right to these boys and girls. And the intention is to continue with the program. And with this sequence, we will have this regime in which we will collaborate with all of the other municipalities. So we will reach out to the other municipalities. We will interact with those municipalities so we can actually fight the scenario of exclusion in our schools. So putting the classes together is something that factors that perspective in. We follow the curriculum proposal, which is, again, prepared by dedicated experts. They are dedicated to the Travessia program to build that together. And working on continued education, working on training the trainers for the specific purpose of joining the Travessia program, because we understand this follow-up process is crucial. So we work on this curriculum construction. We firmly believe that Travessia program will be a turnkey to fight this age grade distortion, to fight school dropout, to fight school failure in the state of Amapá. I will wrap up here. I know we still have a few more slides, but I am having internet connection problems, so I haven't been able to see my slides, but I believe I have been able to share the basic message of the flow we've been through, of the efforts that involved building the Travessia project. We propose to start classes in August, Travessia classes, that is, in August, reaching students from the 6th to the 9th grade. So reaching the students who are in this age grade distortion, and we're also looking at an encouraging active search so we can reach out to those students. And unfortunately, we seem to have missed her again. We seem to have lost her. But she was talking about doing active search for those students who are somehow disconnected from school, who are risking abandoning school because of the pandemic. I don't know whether Neurizete will be hearing our words now, but her talk was very, very inspiring. I think she really managed to share ideas about the movement and the ongoing discussions in the state of Amapá concerning this project, and the sense that it is a tipping point that will help us reflect about those processes of exclusion in school, which are certainly going to reverberate to also many other schools in the state of Amapá, and this network, which includes the other states that are developing these school success strategies, that is actually going to be inspiring to them to help share knowledge. And I've made notes, as Neurizete said. It's a school curriculum that is being developed with the students and for the students, because that is, at the end of the day, the role of a school. We were about to wrap up. We are a bit concerned with time. I will use this opportunity to invite Maria Fernanda Porras right away. She is from Ecuador. She is my UNICEF colleague in Ecuador. So, Fernanda, you are very welcome. Fernanda is going to be sharing with us this experience, which has contributed to ensure continuity of access and permanence in school during these pandemic times. And I am speaking slowly and despacio so that Fernanda understands a little bit of my Portuguese, but she says she understands very clearly, provided we speak slowly, and in so doing, we will all understand one another. Let me say that Maria Fernanda is going to be dividing or splitting her time with Juan, who is going to join Fernanda in her talk. I will introduce the two of them. Maria Fernanda Porras is a clinical psychologist with higher studies in gender and development. And she's got a diploma in integral sexual education. She has been working for 10 years building educational policies, comprehensive educational policies. She is also going to be sharing this presentation with Juan Samaniego, who is an expert. Hello, Juan, there you are. He is an expert in education policies and management. He was once our co-worker as a UNICEF education officer in the Ecuador office. He's got experience in public policies. He was once the Secretary of Education in the District of Quito, and he was also providing assistance to the Ministry of Education in his country. He's a professor of the Andean Simon Bolivar University. He's a consultant for international entities, and he is the executive director of a civil society organization, which would be called Development and Self-Management, and they call it Desarrollo y Autogestión. So it is a pleasure for me to be here with us to share your thoughts, the thoughts that you're going to be sharing with us about the experience you have had in Ecuador. So you are both very welcome. Thank you very much, Julia, Sidney, and all of those people who have been with us here. So the very warm greetings from Ecuador. Thanks for this opportunity, because we have heard interesting debates on education in this seminar about educational processes and models. This gives us an opportunity to rethink them from an integral, from a more comprehensive outlook. So we have had experiences in our countries which are marked by social inequalities, by extreme poverty, by discrimination, which is structural. And I believe that now, with my colleague Juan, we will be sharing with you this experience we have had in Ecuador, which has allowed us to look at how we can keep track of these educational problems project with students who are in situation of vulnerability, by trying to understand their context, by trying to understand the social realities in order to develop mechanisms that will help us generate a process of comprehensive protection to many of those children and adolescents. We also consider that this is a successful experience because it has developed synergy. On the one hand, based on UNICEF technical assistance with their education programs, with the responsibility in terms of which role the municipality plays in that process, particularly the Guayaquil, which is one of the Ecuador's largest cities, but also the experience from civil society organizations that are active in developing and self-management. So we would like to start by presenting this experience, which helps us develop thoughts about the various modes of education. I will start by telling you a little bit about the context in education, which has been mentioned before, but it's important to review it from our perspective. So, what has happened in the Ecuadorian context, and also how the pandemic has interfered in that process. So, we start by saying that the national educational system involves 4.3 million students and 210,000 teachers. We have a very much smaller population than Brazil, which is, for us, nevertheless, a gigantic realm of people. In the past 5 years, there's been reduced coverage to the children's development programs of more than 30,000 children. And also, in early education, we have experienced a 100,000 children's reduction. So that gives us an idea of the educational institutions, which has also helped us implement many actions. As Julia was mentioning in the beginning, Ecuador, up until last week, all of the school educations were closed since the beginning of the pandemic, and that has affected the entire educational community. And before this sanitary emergency, we had a very important problem related to this delay, educational delay, where 250,000 students were outside the education system, and 150,000 who had this school delay of more than 2 years. Given the current conditions of the pandemic that we all know, these numbers are even risking to increase. So, in the country, 6 out of every 10 students considered to be learning less now, given this mode of a remote education.
And the increase in digital resources, only 1 at every 2 students count with personal machines to access the internet. So it forced us to combine with the plans and internet accessibility, but it is the people who have less access to the internet, who are poorer, have to pay more because they don't have the plans with benefits to access the internet. They go to the prepaid cards, which end up being more costly than a regular payment, a regular plan. Another one of the important problems of today is that there's less physical activity, and there's no socialization processes being implemented. It shows that the physical health and the mental health has been affected. In Ecuador, 4 of every 10 students say having felt more anguished or very much stressed during the period. The educators or the teachers also follow. They also need emotional support. The contact time has been reduced meaningfully. 61% of the calls they have to their students, they take just 15 minutes. So on average, they have just 15 minutes of direct contact with their students. They last only 15 minutes. Another problems that the pandemic has brought up has to do with nutrition of the youngest children. They have been very much impacted, especially the students that dependent on the food provided by school. And during the 15 months, they haven't received any school food. Given these complex conditions in which the educational community and the children of our country are. So, next slide, please. So to deal with this different context, we have developed the program that we're going to present to you right now. The idea was to include or to rescue boys and girls that were out of the educational system given the difficult circumstances around them. Where has this initiative been implemented? In a neighborhood called Monte Sinai. It's a suburban area of Guayaquil with 240,000 inhabitants. And this specific neighborhood, it is a place where we have a population in extreme poverty. It was also one of the largest points of concentration of the largest number of deaths and the due to the pandemic. So many people here died. It was one of the areas where we had highest concentration of deaths by COVID. They live in dramatic poverty conditions. As we mentioned, 41% of the people who live there are under dramatic poverty conditions. Also, 60% of the population is underemployed, don't have proper employment. Also, 85% do not have access to drinking water. 30% present subnutrition cases, especially amongst the infants. So infant lack of good nutrition. We have 20% of the children have been excluded or exclude themselves from the educational process. We don't have good connectivity in this area, and this is one of the preconditions needed. And this is shared with many other populations that are having problems with education. If you don't have connectivity, you have access to education very much limited. And during winter, there's an absence of attention from the state to this area. These are neighborhoods that usually and systemically have been invasions. They were invasions original, and then they were legalized, but they don't have basic services. Thousands of boys and girls and teenagers who are enrolled in schools here do not have any connection, not even with their own teachers, and haven't had school routine for more than 7 months. When we started doing this work in this specific sector, we checked that it's for more than 7 months. Kids had no access to any educational process, no contact with their teachers whatsoever. So they were undergoing a huge risk of not remaining in the educational process. So let me continue with the presentation to show you how the process was implemented and what was the result. This is what happened. Thank you very much. This very interesting seminar. Thank you, Mafer. Let me talk slowly as we were requested. Mount Sinai, or Sinai Mount, is a part of the city of Guayaquil. We'll have a great concentration of poverty. When we have winter time, we have almost 5 months of the year during that period. Mount Sinai becomes a very complex concentration of poverty. And boys and girls had been for 7 months without any contact with their schools and teachers.
Exacto, gracias. ¿Qué es lo que hicimos?
So what we did was we identified 6,000 boys and girls in extreme poverty conditions. And with them, we tried to develop a school support program, which was comprised of, or better said, we went to their homes, and in their family space, we tried to implement a school support system. And for that matter, during 5 months, the program has visited every week all the homes of the boys and girls to work basically in reading and understanding, emotional development, and work with the family, the importance for the children to go back to a school routine. During these 5 months, these children were personally visited once a week. And on a different weekly occasion, they would get together in small groups because of biosafety in order to work in groups. Material was given to them, kits of sanitary safety, apparel were given them, and we had more than 300 teachers. Each had the responsibility of 22, 23 boys or girls.
La siguiente, por favor. Hola. Hola.
Sí, sí te escuchamos, ¿aló? Juan. Te escuchamos.
Sí, la siguiente. Sí, si pueden pasar la siguiente lámina.
Esa.
La siguiente. Si pueden pasar la siguiente lámina, por favor.
He's asking for the next slide.
Juan, sí estoy viendo yo que pasaron a la siguiente lámina. No las
If
puedes mirar.
I can see that they're having the slides showed, but yeah, I can see them. So what has this experience showed us? What has it given us? What have we learned from it? Well, this experience allows us to see how distant the public policies are in regard to what is needed by the population. The standardization processes through virtual material distributed by the Ministry of Education, it just didn't get there. It just didn't get there. And the teachers did not have the habit and experience to do syllabus adaptation. So we had thousands and thousands of boys and girls without any school experience. Through the program, what could we learn? We could learn first to check how distant the public policies were trying to implement and the realities of the situation of the children. We also managed to observe a great interest from the families on the educational program. The importance that the family that undergoes extreme poverty gives to school routine of their children. The school routine means that they would have a specific time every week for school activities. The community valued it very, very much. Something else that we learned that was very important has to do with the huge joy of the children to see one another again, the huge joy they had to welcome teachers in their homes and to be able to relate and to interact with the teacher. And also the extreme anguish, in some kinds desperation, and in some cases very, very low self-esteem from the kids because the pandemic somehow would reveal the conditions that they had in the teaching process. Between going regularly to the school makes some aspects, some limitations of the families and of the children invisible to the teachers. Now, with the pandemic, these conditions came to fore. And the deep, basic problems came up. For instance, reading. It looked like reading is a problem of the first classes of the system, but no, it's during all the primary school. And in mathematics, the learning in mathematics. So this program was based on basic learning. The idea is to work directly with the children. Now imagine that when they started the third week of the program, and we found out that the children should talk to one another, and they should go beyond the challenge of this first traumatic part of the pandemic. But the program went on, and the children were very happy to recover some of the routine that generates some sort of sense of safety, of stability, and gives them sense, just to the children and to the families, which is one benefit of the school routines when implemented. We also noticed during the experience the huge importance that implementing schemes of greater autonomic processes with regard to the education, how important it is. The pandemic means the country had to go from a presential logic in education to a more autonomous, from a vertical authoritarian dialogue, which was not a dialogue, it's just a communication, to this different system. These rules of the game in education have changed. And this happened when their conditions were noticed and dealt with and adapted to. The program ended after 5 months, and of the 6,000 children, all of them were about to abandon school, which didn't exist because their needs were not met. And we encouraged them to enroll and to remain in the educational system. I will finish by saying that the school support is paramount to this pandemic process we're undergoing. It gives us an opportunity to advance towards more other ways to educate, in which there's more dialogue, where knowledge about learning can be employed, and the establishment of a non-authoritarian relationship promoting pedagogic progress of the students. This was the largest experience we have had in terms of giving attention to children that were in a situation of school abandonment. And it was successful because the children remained in the educational system. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Fernanda e Juan.
Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Juan, for your presentation.
De vocês, pelo desenvolvimento desse trabalho, né,
for the development of the work you did, and in a very in this territory that is so important and so critical. It's important to have this vision of equity, to provide equity to the children that are under more vulnerable conditions, having many of their rights denied. And this was the scenario you had when you started, and how the project was structured to address these issues, improving the conditions. On the chat, we had the scenario is very similar to many of the situations we go through in our country.
aqui nos diferentes estados, municípios brasileiros
It's similar to many situations we have in different states in Brazil.
Com adiantado da hora bastante significativo. Eu queria pedir aqui para trazer palestrantes de volta aqui,
and I would like to bring our speakers back to screen.
A ideia é que a gente possa aqui, vou trazer um pouco dos comentários, né, o chat.
I'm going to bring to you some of the comments made on the chat. The chat was very busy, many people making comments. So I'll bring some of the comments and of the issues people exposed or discussed on the chat, so you can comment on and also say goodbye so we may proceed to the second workshop. I do apologize for the absence of Neurizete, who was here with us at the beginning, but she continued having connection problems. You know, there's problems with the power supply. She had power outages, so she cannot be with us right now. So I'll read some issues that came up on the chat. Many of the comments were made around the trajectory of school success, to fight racism, structural racism, to check the need to face the exclusion that happens inside the school. When Erundina presented the panel of trajectories of school success, some people said that they always feel frustrated and scared given the large amount of boys and girls that just abandon school, are reproved in the schooling process and enter an age grade distortion. And also the need for the school to be more attractive to children and to offer spaces for dialogue. So, Erundina, I'd ask you to comment a little bit about it.
Acho que dessa perspectiva que para o trajetório de sucesso escolar é tão fundamental
the perspective that is so paramount for the successful school project to bring the students to the process and the implementation of the process. Neurizete also stressed out that point that it required involvement of the players, especially the students.
Por meio da sua fala, a participação também da Neurizete.
So you also support Neurizete in what she said. Please comment on that. First, I apologize for speaking so fast. We are the first in the afternoon. We end up speaking faster than we should. I do speak fast. And I'd like to talk about listening, participation, and engagement as part of the strategy. At UNICEF, this is non-negotiable. This has to be part of the process. And I'm saying this from the perspective of what we call the promotion of successful school stories. When we talk about school failure or school failure culture, we're not putting this failure on the shoulders of the teachers or of the students or on the school itself. The culture of school failure means something broader than that. We have to think of a listening, participation, and engagement process, not just of the student, but also of the teacher, of the manager, of the family, so that jointly, so that collectively, we may understand what are the causes, the structural causes of what brings about the school failure. It is not by chance that we have all these figures that I showed you very briefly. I invite you to go to the chat and check out the data. And please note that the age grade distortion, grade reproval are greater in North and Northeast Brazil. Why? Because we cannot just disregard, and our colleague is here, we cannot disregard the deep social economical differences we have in the country. Lázaro brought this so strongly on to us. We cannot disregard age grade distortion, reproval, and abandonment, that they are greater amongst the blacks, the poor, the indigenous peoples, than of the ones who are white or live in the richer areas of the country. So we have truly to face structural racism. We have to face social and economical differences that we have. And this engagement, this participation, becomes therefore necessary for us to find solutions collectively.
Muito obrigada, Eru. Acho que você traz
Thank you very much.
ponto muito fundamental, inclusive para a gente passar aqui para dialogar com a próxima experiência, né?
This
Porque
brings
você
a point that is important to go to the next experience. You brought
que vem sendo
up the profile of our population that has been systematically, or that has been systematically more vulnerable with regard to school failure.
Brasil, e também pela própria fala da Maria Fernanda e do Juan.
Maria Fernanda and Juan mentioned that, and there's data that come to us that is easy to check, that point to the fact that the population that more systematically fights school failure or faces school failure, we're talking about the blacks, the indigenous peoples, quilombolas, the people that live in the country or in the fields, not in cities, that are in very unfavorable economic situations. They are systematically excluded from the perspective of school failure, but also from school, in the process of school exclusion. It's the process, the scenario that Fernanda and Juan brought us, point to something that is very clear for us in the country. The boys and the girls who were already in a situation of exclusion from school, they were placed even more far away from school. I mean, still further, because they don't have the conditions to access school remotely. We're talking about equipment, we're talking about networks, internet, access to the internet. Here in the country, the most recent research that was developed by the National Union of the Heads of Education pointed that more than 90% of the networks had remote activities in a period through printed material and WhatsApp chat groups. These are processes that are aimed at not losing the link with the students. But on the short, medium, and long term, we have to develop specific action that will face the problem head on. I forgot to say that Juan couldn't make it back to us because of internet problems. So it's a problem for us. It's a problem for our students too. It's a problem for our teachers. It is something that truly has to be faced head on, but amongst the issues that I brought up out of this exclusion scenario that is very similar to ours, and here in Brazil, UNICEF with ONGIMI developed a strategy called School Active Research, present in 23 Brazilian states, identifying the boys and girls who are not in school and bringing them to school again is the effort. And on the chat, they asked how can this program develop in Ecuador? How can it be associated to social assistance, social service? So it's developed along with other areas, along with other sectors beyond educational sector. And they said social service. Were they involved in developing the program? Obrigado, Júlia, e obrigado, Erundina, por compartilhar a experiência que vocês tiveram aí no Brasil. Aprendemos muito desse intercâmbio. Quando falamos de fracasso escolar, estamos dizendo, na verdade, um fracasso social, porque toda a sociedade, todo o Estado, todos perdem. O Estado é que não cumpriu com suas obrigações para com o sistema. E as escolas que têm essas crianças enfrentam desigualdades grandes. E nós temos diversos desafios da pandemia, e uma das aprendizagens é esse enfrentamento do processo que nós apresentamos a vocês, é que não podemos gerar medidas universais. Não é possível gerar medidas universais, porque o processo é complexo demais para nós. Vemos que há muitas condições que não permitiam antes que aquelas diretrizes gerais do Ministério da Educação fossem aplicadas. Então, nesse sentido, uma das principais coisas que aprendemos do sistema é que temos de mudar o contexto. Dadas as realidades de cada uma das populações, essas realidades têm que ser consideradas e têm que ser consideradas especificamente. I'm sorry.
Concerning the infrastructure, concerning the relation with water, and also the community dimensions. This was a project, as I mentioned to you, which has also allowed us to learn and it has allowed us to put to practice the strengths from different institutions. On the one hand, UNICEF with the technical assistance, with the lessons learned, and the possibility to bridge this gap, and also the responsibility that the local government has to think about the budgets, which is very important, which is also their responsibility to develop public policies, and also, on the other hand, the work, the experience, and the practice, the social organizations that work on this theme. In that sense, this is why this project has been considered a successful practice, because of these three different strengths, these three entities that added to the same perspective. Because now we are looking at this first phase we have achieved after 7 months in a sector which has extreme vulnerability, now has total access to education. So they have been able to resume the enforcement of those rights, and the municipality has taken that as part of their public policies, and they are continuing the project. So we're starting again a new school cycle focused on children from the early childhood. So I believe this is one of the strengths, where there are also various sectors intervening on that. Not only the educational sector, but also the health sector is involved with various themes, and care and attention. We are now trying to involve social protection services, because the sector addressing these conditions of extreme poverty and inequalities, this is also a sector where we have many cases of family violence. And this is why we need to engage the other sectors, so we can have this integral model to respond to those needs. I apologize, her transmission is not coming too clear, so I missed some of the parts of her talk. But so what we have to reduce is the number of students who have no contact with the school. So in that sense, I think this experience has helped to show that when we bring all of those stakeholders together to build public policies, that may work. But it may also achieve the more important needs. Thank you very much, Fernanda. It becomes clear to all of us how important it is, based on those two experiences which actually interact. So they show the need we have in order to align our social policies. And when we speak about aligning our social policies, we're talking about having an intersector perspective. We need more than ever, and actually the pandemic actually calls upon us in a way that we cannot deny that invitation. So it's not an invitation, actually, it's calling upon us in the sense that we need to have the various policies in order in a way to complement one another in an interactive way, so that we can not deny the rights to our children and adolescents. So only by means of this perspective, or by means of the Ecuador experience, which has brought this outlook on the issues that are related to inclusion and permanence during the pandemic, or even the school success trajectory experience that looks at this process of exclusion which happens within the school space. So we need to have an ensemble of players working in a unified manner and an intersectorial manner. So we need to engage the various policies. We need a much broader ensemble of players who are willing to interact and exchange, and more than anything, obviously, we need the entire school community. And now we're looking at the students, we're looking at the teachers, we're looking at the families, to get them involved and engaged in this discussion around exclusion and school failure. I think it was excellent to be here with you during this afternoon. And in order to wrap up, and I think it makes sense, I'd like to make this connection with the artistic group, which is a group of indigenous rap musicians who made a presentation at the end of the day yesterday. So I did not understand most of the song because it was actually being spoken in an indigenous language, but the refrain he shares, and I hope it makes sense with what I'm going to be telling you now, but he used to repeat, a united village shows its face. So, a united village, this united village which we are, when it comes to players who are engaged and focused on ensuring rights to adolescents, we will only be able to be successful, we will only be able to make those boys and girls, we will only have them, their rights ensured, if we are united. This is an invitation, basing that invitation on yesterday's representation. So we are inviting this village where we all are to show up, to show our faces, and to get engaged in this process. Thank you very much. I have to invite Sidney back to the stage. He cannot, he cannot be, he has to be telling me to abide by the time, so he'll have to do that digitally. So I'd like to express my gratitude for this excellent mediation, and I would also like to thank Maria Fernanda and Elondina and everybody else from the UNICEF, also Professor Untitled and Professor Juan, who have not stayed here until the end of this part of the workshop because of internet connections, but they were here and are sharing as much as they can. So I would like to continue on the same link so that we can migrate to the second workshop. So let's bid farewell to our co-workers. Thank you very much. We are very thankful to you for sharing your experiences. So what we have been seeing since the beginning of the seminar, that the main objective we have is to discuss these causes, to look for the root cause of these discontinued trajectories, so that leads to this school failure culture that we're trying to fight. So in order to continue with that discussion, we'll migrate to another theme, which is now a major challenge because of the pandemic, which is to ensure bonds are maintained in the midst of this hybrid model, a model which is separated by distance when we're talking about the offer of education. So this second workshop is going to be mediated by Juliana Sartori, also from UNICEF Brasil. We're going to be talking now about remote education, about maintaining these bonds and links between students and the school and the families and the school community. We're going to be sharing experiences from Brazil, from Peru, and from Argentina. So I'd like to invite you to continue with us. Now, when we have more than 200 people participating in this seminar with us, so we hope you are together with us for a few more minutes to understand how that has provided for this path of success. Juliana Sartori, now please join us. Hello, Sydney. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be with you today. It's actually a privilege to be mediating this panel, which will involve many experts on remote education and hybrid education. So, Sydney, we'll have three experiences being shared here. The first one is going to be focused on this attempts to engage in active listening with Erika Cuba, who is a UNICEF education officer in Peru. And the other experience is going to be Deixa que eu conto, which involves podcasts for children from 0 to 8 years. She is Carolina Velho. She is a consultant for education at UNICEF Brasil. And the second one, the last one, is rural schools of technological base, presented by...
Então, vou deixar vocês aqui super à vontade,
acompanhando
também o chat que está
bombando e muita gente. We keep looking at the chat feature because there are many comments from everybody who are sharing experiences from Brazil and from the other countries who are participating. So I wish you have a very good workshop. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Before I invite the next speaker, I would like to say something that Julia said before. The first panel also had this very important discussion in terms of the culture of school failure and many other strategies that have been considered. But the schools that have been shut down during this long time, during the pandemic, there are many challenges in order to ensure safe reopening of the schools. That's a gradual process. And in this scenario, remote education and hybrid education have been strategies that will help ensure the connection of children and adolescents with their schools. So when it comes to access, it's been a challenge because of digital inclusion or the situation of vulnerability that those children and adolescents are exposed to. So, thinking about this process of reopening school in a gradual manner, remote education has been an important pedagogical response in order to ensure students' connection with their schools. And looking at each territorial specificity is crucial to have a collective approach to how we will ensure children and adolescents their right to education. Many things have been considered in terms of sharing content and materials by means of radio, television, apps, social media, in order to be able to reach those children and adolescents, and hybrid education, which involves in-person activities as well as remote activities using digital technologies, technologies of information and communication, ICTs. So the idea is to combine different strategies so that students can develop to their fullest extent and to continue with the educational process. So this panel is going to be addressing many challenges concerning remote education and hybrid education. Those challenges actually have different layers to them. There's a first level, a first tier, which has to be understood, which is access to education and digital inclusion, a challenge which has been intensified by the pandemic and also by the quality of internet access. A second tier, which is the quality of this education. The first panel elaborated on this theme, how we can actually fight this culture of school failure. And the third tier is to think about hybrid education as one of the possibilities to fight this culture of school failure. I know these challenges we have had currently to schools and educators has been a big challenge, an intense one. And here is an opportunity for us to share some of the successful experiences in that sense. So I'd like to invite the first participant, the first speaker, Erika Cuba. Erika is the UNICEF Peru Education Office. She worked in the Ministry of Education on issues of educational access, diversification, and generation of educational provision for boys, girls, and adolescents. And Erika is going to be presenting this system of active search for students who are outside the school or students who are running the risk of losing this link with the school in 4 different regions of Peru. So, Erika, you are very welcome. You have the floor.
Erika? A gente te escuta.
¿Comienzo? ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, pode falar.
Perfecto. Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be in this meeting. Thank you for allowing me to contribute my part in this concern that we have about how remote education is being conducted and what we have been doing in our UNICEF Peru office, what we have been doing there about it. So perhaps I should have my presentation shown at this moment. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, the next one. Thank you. Okay, the first thing I'd like to tell you is that last year, the Peru office decided to have this pilot on a system that will look for secondary education students who were in risk of losing their connections with the educational system. Schools started in Peru, like in many other countries, started in March last year. So not all schools were opened. Just a few rural schools could actually open. It was something around 800 schools which were doing this semi-in-person service. Up until March last year, the Peruvian Ministry of Education developed this strategy, which is called Aprendo en Casa, I learn at home, so that students could continue with their education. From our office, we had this great concern with what was going on, particularly with the children and adolescents, because we had this intervention in a big number of schools of 4 different territories. And what we were told at the time was that there was this grim conditions, which was 30 or 40% of the students were not receiving satisfactory service in that sense. In the country, we think that the country has a debt with the teenagers because there's a relatively high access. 8 of every 10 students actually conclude secondary education. So those accomplishments, despite that, they have been very low. And relevance of education and the development of the alternative forms of education for the secondary levels and for the rural zones is still at its very early stages. Also, during this pandemic, poverty has increased a lot, and we know that of those students who conclude secondary education, when they are poor, this percentage goes down to 6 out of every 10 students. And when it comes to extreme poverty, they drop down to 5 out of every 10 students. In that sense, particularly what has happened in recent months, poverty has increased, as I was telling you, approximately 10%. That has had us very much concerned about it. We know that this vulnerability is replicated also amongst those who have the conditions to engage in this remote system. Many secondary students have to move away from the countryside in order to continue their studies. So we had this concern with keeping schools open, and assistance during these initial months of school cycle, particularly in rural areas, and when the students had to remain in their homes and they could not move to the other cities where they would be able to continue with their education. In this system, we developed this methodology in order to locate those students who were at risk, and we started to develop this definition. We were not clear about how to measure access to distance education in the country. So, we developed these 3 definitions. When students does not have access by means of the existing means, television, radio, or internet, they were at risk when they had reduced connectivity. They could connect only twice or 3 times during the week for various reasons, or the students who could not do their tasks, their housework. And also, we had those students who were not connected. The teachers could not locate the students. They did not have either the telephone number or the address, so they could not connect with those students. Still, we developed this strategy, which had 3 different steps. The first one was to liaise with the schools in order to start this search process, adapting the strategy to each school context, requesting permits and other information about them. And we also had this survey distributed to teachers and students in order to raise more information about the students. So we started to map the conditions of those students so that we could learn a little more about their conditions by means of this community diagnosis. So we were able to establish what the barriers were, what the difficulties were, so that we could implement remote education. And also, we were looking for students and their parents or caretakers in order to involve them in the discussions, and that provided feedback that we can bring back information about those students from the school. This is the map of the country. We have basically 4 regions in this pilot system that we started to develop. Loreto and Ucayali, which are in the Amazonian region. And on the left-hand side, we have this region, coastal region, which is Lima, and another one in the Andes, which is Huancavelica. So that involves 7 districts. This pilot allowed us to reach something around 11,000 students. And the first results that we had includes data that showed that things were a bit worse than we had anticipated. Slightly less than half, 44%, of the students actually had access to distant education, and the other half of the students did not have adequate access. Or they were having access, but they were having lots of difficulties. So 47% were actually at risk, or they did not connect at all. So 6% was absolutely not connected. Where they were, there was, and they had not been contacted by their school, and 1.5 of the students addressed by that study were the ones who have moved from one school to another. Concerning the regions visited, Lima and Huancavelica, they were near the overall average in terms of connectivity issues. Also, the Amazonian regions of Loreto and Ucayali, there was greater concern because that was a little more than 1/3 of the students could actually manage to connect with distant education. Now, there was an important percentage of students who were never connected at all. So we're talking about 10% in Loreto, 7% of non-connected students in Ucayali, and very high percentages, much more than half of the students, had connectivity risks or problems, effective problems. So if we look into it with more details, the pandemic has affected the economy of most of the homes. And in Ucayali, you can see that we have very important data. For instance, the districts we mentioned, particularly the ones that have indigenous populations, majority of the indigenous populations, 12% of their adolescents who are already parents or teenagers who are pregnant. Particularly the male students also work. So, and the women do domestic work. It doesn't mean that one doesn't do the other, but the emphases are, as I just mentioned, and furthermore, we should mention that when it comes to Macicea, also in Cayeria, two districts of Ucayali, if the majority had any type of connection, it was basically through TV. And in the Amazonian region, there was a very similar context. In Macicea, there were 24% of students who did not have any resource in order to connect with online education or distant education. In Loreto, however, we had 10%, a little better, but still very worrying. In Lima, which is the national capital, but it is a periphery district, and the discussion was that somewhere around half of the students were actually having access to distant education, because many students had some kind of device, for instance, a smartphone, which allowed them to connect. And also in Huancavelica, there was a situation which was less unfavorable than in the Amazonian, because many people had access to internet connection by means of smartphones or other types of device. And that leads to lots of thoughts. Nevertheless, we believe that we cannot concentrate those difficulties, as has been mentioned, the lack of devices to access distant education, but also the lack of services. If you have a device, it doesn't work if you don't have internet connection. And in many places in Peru, you do not have access to internet, and when there is, it is never of great quality. And we also have other problems like power shortages and water problems, which are elements that make it even more difficult for those services. We are facing limitations which are structural. And now, we believe there's a lot of emphasis on having to solve those problems. We have seen also that adolescents live complex lives. They work and they participate in housework. So, they actually perform different tasks in their homes, and because of lack of school, because of lack of attention on the part of their parents or tutors, it's difficult for them to keep up with school tasks because the parents are away from home and working and other things, and the teachers cannot keep up with those problems. Connectivity problems play a role, but we believe that increased violence in homes has led to mental health problems because they couldn't go out of home, they couldn't communicate because of social isolation, they do not feel protected at home, and that has affected their learning process. So, one of the most complex problems has to do with the adolescents and the indigenous peoples in Kwajalein, in Loreto, which includes this problem of pregnancy or early maternity, which are very much central problems. So we believe that it requires specific attention because of these double or even triple problematic that happens in their lives. So, in the face of all that, schools are not really responding in a proper way to all of the students. We believe that we have to put in place some follow-up systems that will allow formal education to actually improve the conditions and the effectiveness of that basic service. Also, we have some information here. And in addition to providing feedback to the schools in terms of the results that have been achieved with those pilot projects, and to share detailed information about the students, which could be retrieved by means of that system so that they could continue with their secondary education. So we've been working in the schools by means of this experience, that we consider to be a life experience, but we have been able to put specific actions in place in order to contribute to reopening the schools in the sense of providing each school with a comeback plan. And the schools need to consider how they're going to do that. And that involves having a roster of students that will facilitate follow-up, because life is dynamic, and that has to do with, bringing students back to school and keeping them from dropping out of school. In that sense, we have provided all of this feedback of the process that we have developed in our office, and we have taken that to the Ministry of Education and to the subnational levels, which was around that time when the Ministry of Education organized this school cycle. As you can see on the upper part of the slide, which signaled that the percentages for 2020 that would be concluded as in halfway through the year of 2021.
In response to the second phase, the first phase was the plan for recovery, the second is leveling, and the third is to consolidate what has been learned, and the final phase is to continue the learning or reinforcement for the ones who need some reinforcement on their learning process. And this leveling phase, in one of our territories, we have developed an experiment which was based on doing an audit with students that the schools would indicate they haven't finished their learning process, not in the present, not in presence, not virtually. So we used the support of voluntary people, young students of the last cycles of their studies, or some who had finished their education career or formation that could provide guidelines for them, either virtually or presentially, to groups of students who had not finished their studies. And the idea was to use small groups, and this tutorial work or tutoring work was to develop emotional competences and autonomic competences too. Students who had difficulty to access were given material, and the families were instructed about the importance of this education, and this helped students to feel safer to be part of the schooling cycle in order to plan better the use of the strategies that are more applicable and more useful for them, therefore increasing or improving their results. And then the students could be considered in the development of their own pedagogic process, because they were participating on the full development of their potential as students. This is just a very quick summary of what I wanted to show to you about what we have been working at UNICEF. I hope we'll extend this plan in the months ahead. We are in a period of the classes have been closed. We have to activate, schools are closed. We have to activate other means to continue the studies and to reconnect with our students. Thank you very much, Erica. Very inspiring to listen to your experience in Peru. I think this challenge with regard to access to school has been a great one. And I want to now introduce the second part of the presentation. We know that children between 6 and 10 years of age are running the risk of being excluded from the schooling process, and we want to ensure access to learning. It has been a huge challenge in many different aspects. So thank you very much, Erica, for your participation. And now let's invite Carolina Velho to take part as the second speaker, second presentation.
Olá, Carol, tudo bom?
Olá, boa tarde.
Hello, good afternoon to all.
Boa tarde. A Carol, ela é consultora da área de educação no UNICEF Brasil.
Carolyn is consulting in UNICEF Brazil, is master in education by the University of Brasilia, ex-coordinator for teaching at Mackey Ministry of Education and Culture, had other formations, consulting in children's education for UNICEF Brazil. That's her current job. Thank you, Carol, for being here. Erica presented some challenges with regard to access, and children do not live a different scenario. We know the risk of school exclusion in the context of the pandemic. So please talk a little bit about the strategy. And that's it. The floor is yours.
Bem-vinda, Carol.
Obrigada, Juliana.
Thank you, Juliana.
Queria agradecer e já
I'd like to thank and take this opportunity to tell you how happy I am to be in this international seminar or taking part in it. And it was a pleasure to take knowledge of all the effort put in by UNICEF's team to bring this seminar to fruition and promote this exchange of experiences we're having this afternoon. I'll try to speak slower or slowlier. It is a learning process. First, I would like to say that what Juliana brought us is paramount. Access
to education
no momento da pandemia
in a moment
tem sido dos
of a
motivos,
pandemic, or while a pandemic is going on,
que a gente
has been a priority.
Crianças abandonando ou não acessando,
it's easier to see children abandoning or not having access to the opportunities that remote schooling has offered. So somehow there is an exclusion process.
Trago hoje para apresentar a iniciativa Deixa que eu conto.
The initiative, let me tell you, let me share you my screen. This is the Let Me Tell You initiative.
Foi por apresentar uma experiência.
And we chose to present to you
que dialoga,
this experience, which is the establishing of a dialogue with a certain stage of education, which is the first stage of basic education in Brazil, which is the children's education. And historically, there's a history of denied access to children's education, basic elementary education. It's a recent right. Elementary education as a right. It's the first stage of basic education in Brazil. It was started in 1996. And daycare centers were merged into the education teaching process. This implies in a movement of bringing children into school. While they're still infants. The number of enrolled children is more than 8 million. We have more than 500,000 teachers from daycare centers to schools, and more than 110,000 premises. These are huge figures. However, many children are left out in spite of it. It's important to mention the figures because we're talking to Latin America. We understand this child education process for since childbirth until almost 6 years of age, 5 years, 11 months. It goes from daycare centers, preschools, and there's a syllabus organized around fields of experience and the right of learning. This has been written in many documents. The most updated one is of 2017, which is national base as a syllabus. We understand that for children's educations, we need qualified teachers, and there's a process. Well, it is basic education, so I have to follow some standards as days of school, hours of school. This partial or full day journey of school, that we need some schooling documentation. There's a certain systematization of the learning process in a documentation that has to be delivered to the family or to the families. So this identity, along with the age bracket, places us or leads us to a learning process that's very specific. Just as we have specifics in teaching reading and writing, as there's specificities in teenage teaching or teaching teenagers, they have a way of learning. And teachers have to be qualified for a certain way of teaching, which is different from the rest from the other stages of basic education. Thinking of that and looking into all the challenges the pandemic is imposing on us, UNICEF Brasil has built an initiative which is Deixa que eu conto, let me tell you.
Que tem como objetivo trazer para cada menino, para cada menina, histórias, brincadeiras
which is aimed at bringing to each boy and girl his stories, plays, and curiosities through podcasts or audios. Each audio is on average 30 minutes long, and we very carefully implemented a process that is very respectful in order to respect infants in Brazil, that all of them could identify themselves in the stories. So these podcasts, they can be accessed through the YouTube, through Spotify, or they can be downloaded through WhatsApp and be sent. And the idea is to reach the most vulnerable ones. Many community radios, university radios, made partnership with UNICEF to broadcast these or disseminate the podcasts. And it is important to say that it is a very important experience. It places us, it puts us in the process, or it brings up the process that's adequate to their age range. It brings the children to be part of the story and to use their imagination in order to foster their learning. It does not replace collective experience that you have when you go to school as a child. However, it allows a getting closer to their families, which is a very important bond for this age range. It is the moment when families and children can play together, hear a story together, carry out activities together, listen to something interesting, interview, they can dance, they can sing. These are activities that make sense to children from 0 to 6 years of age.
A gente, a partir disso, construiu 186 podcasts que já estão.
We have produced 186 podcasts already available, both at the UNICEF page and on the YouTube. If you type Deixa que eu conto as written on screen, Julia Caligione is also going to put on the chat. They're going to place the link if you want to go straight to it. But as it is written, Deixa que eu conto, if you write that on YouTube, Spotify, or UNICEF, you're going to get there. It's for a very specific public, from children to 0 to 6 years of age, but especially children between 0 and 5 years of age have a material that is linked to the national basic syllabus for their age bracket, and consider the potential for their development, ensuring the rights to learning that all these children have.
Então, a partir dos podcasts, UNICEF
So based on the podcast, UNICEF has launched on June the 1st a guide of pedagogic possibilities. It's a guide of Deixa que eu conto, let me tell you guide. The guide tries to talk to all the teachers and all the municipal secretaries, coordinators,
numa perspectiva de que toda
children's
criança
education.
aprende
And the perspective is
são
that every
premissas
child can learn.
que também estão
These are
bem
assumptions that
evidentes
are
nos
very much
podcasts,
evident
né?
in the podcasts.
Que é importante para uma educação infantil de
It's important
qualidade
for quality
ter uma escuta ativa, atenta
education of children
e afetiva,
to
né?
listen
A gente
attentively and
considera que
tenderly.
boas perguntas
We consider that
favorecem
good
boas
questions
experiências e
promote
investigações.
good
Isso é
experiences
muito
and good
importante em
investigation,
qualquer
and
faixa
this is
etária,
important at
para qualquer
any age
etapa
bracket,
da educação
at any
básica, mas para a
stage
educação
of basic
infantil é
education. But for
fundamental,
elementary education, that's
né?
paramount.
Que as crianças possam investigar,
It's
que as
paramount for
crianças
children to
possam
investigate, to
perguntar,
ask questions,
ter dúvidas e espaço para discutir todas as hipóteses,
to raise questions and
né, que
discuss
elas
all the
têm
possibilities
sobre
that
o
come up to their
mundo,
minds about
sobre
the
a
world,
natureza,
about
sobre
nature,
elas
about
mesmas, sobre suas
themselves,
famílias,
about
né?
their families.
As histórias ouvidas, faladas
The
e
stories
lidas
heard,
geram
spoken,
aprendizagem e por
and
isso a
read
escolha
generate
de
learning.
podcasts que
So we
trouxessem
chose
histórias,
podcasts
né?
that would bring
Essas
stories.
histórias estimulam
The
curiosidade e
stories
o
do
conhecimento.
stimulate curiosity.
E essa quinta premissa que é fundamental,
And the fifth
onde a brincadeira,
assumption
a
is
imaginação
paramount.
são centrais em
Playing
qualquer
and
ação
using the
pedagógica
imagination
com
are
crianças da educação
central
infantil,
to
eu
learning,
acredito com crianças
especially at the elementary
e
stage.
adolescentes de qualquer faixa
But
etária,
even
né? Eu
for
costumo dizer que
teenagers,
bom material,
a good
uma boa
material,
história
a good
para as
story,
crianças
I say,
pequenas,
for
se é uma
small
boa
children. If
história
it is
que
a
tem
good story,
qualidade,
if it is a good quality
ela também é
story,
boa para
well
os
elaborated,
adultos,
it
né?
is a good story for adults too,
E para os jovens.
and for
Bom, o guia,
youngsters
ele tem formato
or youths.
de
The
ficha,
guide
onde cada ficha
has this
traz
format as shown, like
uma história,
a sheet of
um
paper.
podcast,
Each has a
né?
story, has a
Onde tem
podcast.
uma sinopse
There's a synopsis
e
or
uma
a summary
estrutura
of the
que diz o
story,
que você
and the
encontra
structure
em
that
cada
tells you
programa,
what you
né?
will find
Então,
on each of the
eu
programs, each of the
escolhi aqui dois
podcasts.
programas,
I
o
took
programa
two.
do Patinho Feio, da Carol
The
Levi,
Ugly Duck of
que
Carol
conta para
Levi,
nós a
which
história
tells us
bem
the
conhecida, né,
well-known
do Patinho
story of
Feio,
the Ugly Duck,
mas que também traz poesia,
but also
e
brings
também traz
poetry,
o
also
Eusébio e a
brings
Aurora, que são dois personagens
Eusébio and Aurora,
conto,
which are two characters
que
of
ensinam
Deixa que eu conto.
brincadeiras,
They
que
teach
dialogam sobre
plays and
esse
they
momento
talk
delicado
about
da
this
pandemia, que dialogam sobre o
delicate moment
retorno,
of the pandemic. They talk about the
retorno
return
seguro
of
e
the safe return
saudável
of
das
normal
crianças,
conditions
né?
and healthy coming back to normal
Que
conditions.
trazem explicações de brincadeiras.
They
A gente
explain
tem
plays.
uma música
We
e
have a
uma
music
brincadeira que é a boca de
and
forno,
also
que muitas
a
pessoas,
play,
muitos adultos
which is
podem
Boca de
conhecer,
Forno.
né?
Many adults may know
Então, essa
that.
estrutura dessa ficha traz
The structure
o que
of this
se encontra em cada dos programas, qual é a
summary
história
tells
daquele
you what you can
programa,
find in each
e aí
program, what's the
traz
story
algumas
of the program,
perguntas
and then
que podem
it suggests
incentivar as
questions that
crianças a
may prompt
investigar
children to
questões
further
ou
investigate some
perguntas que
issues,
ajudem as
or
crianças a
questions that will
entender e
help
a
children to
compreender
understand
as narrativas ou pensar
the
sobre as
narrative,
narrativas, né?
or to meditate or
E
think
a gente
over the
destaca
narrative.
Pedacinho do
And
podcast
we
e traz uma
bring
atividade
about
para
a little
cada faixa
bit of the
etária.
podcast,
Então, uma
and we
atividade
bring
para 0 a
an
3,
activity for
uma atividade
each
para 4 e 5 e uma
age bracket,
atividade
from
para
0
6
to
a 8
3
anos,
to 4
né?
to 5, and
Então,
from
eu
6 to
destaquei
8
aqui
years
o
of
Patinho
age.
Feio
So
e a
this is
Árvore de
one that I brought.
Baobá,
The other
que
one
também
is
é
number
uma
145,
história que
Árvore
tá
de
dentro do Deixa
Baobá.
que eu conto
The baobab tree
afro-brasileiro,
is
onde a
in
gente
the
tem
Afro-Brazilian
aí
folklore.
42 podcasts
We have
de
42
histórias
podcasts
afro-brasileiras
or
contadas
Afro-Brazilian
e
stories
narradas por contadores
told by
de todo o país, né? A gente tem contador
storytellers of all
Curitiba,
over the country, from
contadora
Curitiba,
de
from
Recife,
Recife,
de São
from
Paulo,
São Paulo,
do Amapá,
of
enfim,
Amapá.
nossos contadores de histórias são
Our
maravilhosos
storytellers
e
are wonderful,
tornaram possível
and they
todo
made
esse
possible
processo criativo aí
all
que
of
foi
this
a
creative
produção dos
process, which is the
podcasts
production of the
e
podcasts
do guia.
and of this guide of the podcasts.
A gente também indica ou damos algumas dicas de como
we give some tips on the guide on how the teachers can, once they hear the programs, how they can organize and plan their activities, encourage children to express themselves physically, following or given a certain music, or ask questions based on the themes the musics bring them, or even if they can further investigate themes that are important for them, that make sense for them at that period of their human development. And for municipal secretariats, they can include the links of the programs on their sites and social media to facilitate access of the children. The secretariats can go to their schools and provide them guidance on how they can use those podcasts with the families of the children of that region. We want this program to reach the greatest number of homes possible. We have more than 3 million accesses to Deixa que eu conto, to the podcasts. And we want it to fly, not just in Brazil, but in countries that also speak Portuguese. They can also benefit from this initiative, let me tell you. Based on this Deixa que eu conto initiative, the secretariats can program the continuous education for their teachers. And now, closing my presentation, I chose to bring a small video of Valentina, a 4-year-old child, who listens Deixa que eu conto, and she sent us this video. It shows us the strength of these stories in the lives of the children. So I'll leave you, Valentina. I thank you once again for the opportunity. Hi, guys. This is mine. As she started telling a story of a girl, but she had a problem. I don't understand exactly what she's saying. But she's telling a story of a girl, and she's very enthusiastic about it. The girl of the story lived in a farm, and she was desperate because of some reason, and she met the wolf, and they became friends. And she was very happy. And she even entered the shed of the wolf.
Bom, eu agradeço e deixo o contato do Deixa que eu conto, @unicef.org.
Deixa que eu conto at unicef.org. We're available to you to continue this dialogue.
Pensar que uma trajetória de sucesso
when we think that a successful school trajectory starts at elementary school,
lindo, Carol, obrigada.
An infant's contact with education. Thank you very much, Carol. It's very nice to hear your experience. Also, hearing Valentina warms our heart. In this late afternoon, to ensure access to education at this age bracket can be a challenge. So having access to experiences such as these and be able to broadcast this in different medias does ensure access. Thank you very much for your participation, Carol. And I would like to invite Irina Paparella to present a very important theme about secondary rural schools mediated by technology. So how can we ensure learning and access in rural schools using technology? Irina Paparella, now the floor is yours. Welcome. Speak slowly, that's very important. And she's a consultant from UNICEF Argentina. She has got a bachelor degree in education by the University of Buenos Aires, an expert in technology of education, and she acts as a consultant in the education area of UNICEF, and she's part of the team of this initiative for secondary rural schools mediated by technology. So welcome, Irina. It's a pleasure to have you with us to share your experiences.
Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias. Gracias por invitarnos a este espacio y compartir con las colegas de Perú y Brasil y con todos los presentes. Bueno, voy a empezar a compartir acerca de la iniciativa
by sharing us about the technology-mediated communities, secondary communities. So we'll start with our presentation. Thank you. To provide some context, in Argentina, the educational system is structured on the basis of the National Education Act, which has made secondary studies to be mandatory. And the framework of this law, and the states and the provinces are responsible to ensure that law. Nevertheless, given the available information, we see that there are social, territorial, and educational inequalities, and not only in the provinces but also in the countryside. Therefore, it is a major challenge for educational policies, but also for the provincial systems to ensure this right. Therefore, generating alternatives, institutional and pedagogical alternatives to promote laws, to promote rights at the community levels and the state level with high level of quality. And the education are instruments that are necessary for population education. In that sense, the initiative of technology-mediated rural institutions, which started in Argentina in the year 2002 in cooperation with the provincial government, and that is intended to ensure access to secondary education for adolescents who live in remote rural areas where, at the time when the initiative was started, there was no services available, and also to reduce the digital gap between rural and urban adolescents. So, the proposal, model proposed, has some specific characteristics. I will describe them very briefly. A part of those schools are actually operating around a central school, which operate in a urban context, which is usually located in the province capital. Also, another part of the school actually are distributed to different areas where students can be attending those classes in person in those remote areas. And those classes have specific characteristics. Students attending those classes, they have this multi-year class, which means all of the years, all of the grades in secondary education are actually included provided in the same space, the same physical space. So that involves a teacher and an indigenous assistant, because in many of the areas, students are actually coming from original communities. The central school, on the other hand, involves the teachers from the curricular areas and the school principals and the managers with different technical and pedagogical team, as well as supervision and coordination. This is why the model has this key aspect to it to be operating. This is a model that has double mediation. On the one hand, technological mediation, since these classes that are conducted in the rural areas, students have technological equipment provided by the initiative and by the national connectivity plans, through which they connect with the teachers in the central school, while the students in the central school go in person to those classes, attend those classes in person. But the educational content is the same as that which is provided to the students in the remote areas. So there are both processes, online and in presence classes. So students in the rural areas have a chance to participate in the class more active, even though they are not in present. So we have the technological mediation. We also have the mediation of the indigenous assistants who are attending the classes with the students, and they are actually followed up. They are assisted by the teachers in order to handle the activities and help the students with their school tasks. As I was saying, the initiative has been in place in Argentina since 2012. It started in this province of Chaco and is currently being implemented in another 6 provinces in the northern part of the country. This year, the proposal was expanded and allowed us to reach out to 10 rural schools with 110 rural villages. And that reaches 1,900 students who are now studying under this SRTIC, which are the IT-mediated schools.
Bien.
This model has allowed us to have different focus, to have different observations about the impact the model has on those specific populations where the program has been implemented. We have been able to identify 2 major outcomes, or 2 major focuses of impact caused by this model. On the one hand, the model increases the level of graduation rates in the provinces where the model is in place. The system has provided data that allows us to make a comparison. So, and the technology-mediated rural secondary schools shows that those students achieve 16 points more than the other systems, as you can see in the chart. If we compare, for instance, the Misiones, the province of Misiones, the rate of graduation rates offered by the national system of assessment in 2017, 36% of the students were reached. And if we compare that with the data from the SRTICs, that data is 52%. And now speaking more specifically about the population which are included in the model, currently we have 685 students coming out from this SRTIC model. And 42% of those students are actually coming from indigenous communities. We have put in place some surveys in order to learn of the situation that were graduated from secondary education, and that allowed us to see that 75% of the students who concluded their secondary education, they either study or work. And 90% of those students agreed that their experience with the SRTEX has actually prepared them for the future. Another impact that we have been able to identify as a relevant impact resulting from this initiative is involved with the development of the digital communities. In that sense, this is a technology-mediated initiative. We have been able to identify some issues that are connected to that point. For instance, that the students feel that they are better prepared in order to enter adult life, and they have better conditions to look for jobs. In that sense, a survey we conducted with students who are currently attending the model that shows that 7 out of every 10 students learned how to use a computer within their schools. In their turn, 90% of the students have access to internet and use internet during the classes and from school. That means in the schools, the schools in their communities has become a space whereby they can actually have access to the internet. The rural schools in general are effective in communities that do not have access to mobile telephone signal, and thanks to the access they have to the school, they have access to connectivity, and they have received satellite connectivity. Continuing with the results I wanted to share with you, 86% of those students are highly motivated, and they say that they wish to continue with higher education.
Bien. El modelo, como les decía, funciona desde el 2012.
The model, as I was telling you, has been in operation since 2012. In 2020, with the COVID-19 pandemic, has presented a challenge, which is to plan some response to that education situation in the health context. In that sense, we have designed, within the framework of the rural schools, a plan that was intended to ensure continued education to the students attending the technology-mediated rural secondary school, and its turn to promote continued quality of the remote education in the context of the pandemic. So those students had already been working with mediation of technology, meaning they had contact with technological devices, but the challenges in this context, as I was saying before, connectivity, or actually access to the possibility of having a computer at hand or any other technological device, is exclusively provided within the framework of their school. Since the schools are closed, we have to think about new strategies. And the reach of that plan, as I said, it involves 6 provinces, 1,600 students, 300 teachers, and 110 rural communities.
And
the response plan contemplated 5 lines of action. First one had to do with developing materials on prevention and caution during the pandemic. All of the students in that community have access to that information, and whatever material is related with prevention and caution has been distributed. Also, there's been support to distributing educational materials with priorities to the students in the farthest communities. Many schools developed their own materials, and other schools received materials from the national plan, which is called Seguimos Educando, which has received UNICEF support for printing that material. And we continue to prioritize those communities which would have continued disconnected because they did not have access to mobile telephony. Schools might have other points of connectivity, but they were closed otherwise. So they made sure that they would be receiving those materials, and that is going to ensure that they continue with their educational projects. On the other hand, we developed this follow-up plan, a remote educational plan for those who are attending the SRTX schools. We provided specific meetings with the teams in order to continue with the education process in the midst of this uncertain scenario. And we were working specifically with a focus on the pedagogical aspects and tapping from the available technologies in order to put these actions in place. And also, it involved stronger adolescent participation with students who are attending the technology-mediated schools. And the last line of action has to do with keeping track of and following up on those students so that they are aided in contexts where there is connectivity access difficulties. And that involves local site visits, telephone follow-up, developing radio programs and printed educational materials, as I have just mentioned, and also the possibility for some of the communities to have this open school as a point where they would have access to internet. So students could actually come in shifts and then connect to the internet to attend their classes. From the SRTX experience during COVID-19, with a focus on the results from the response plan, I would like to share some of those data with you. 80% of the students coming out of those SRTX, they have maintained their connections with the school, and 60% of those students maintained educational exchange. That represented more than 20% than what is reported by adolescents in urban centers. On the other hand, cell phones and use of WhatsApp was the main means to provide connection between students and with that exchange process. 7 out of 8 schools received primers under the Seguimos Educando program, which is a national strategy. And 70% of those students felt that they were prepared to continue with their practice in the context of remote education. This data corresponds to the teachers who were actually part of the initiative.
Bien. Con esto concluimos. Muchas gracias.
That's what I had to share with you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. So, Yanina, I would really like to thank you for your presentation. It's very important for us to see how this relationship with technology allows us to provide greater integration and to ensure learning in the context of rural schools. Now I'd like to invite Carol and Erica to come back together at this moment, because we are looking at having a short time for debate. We are running short of time, but I would like to wrap up this encounter before we engage in this talk. We did receive comments through our chat box. We have a few challenges, as presented before, which includes ensuring access and quality of education, and how we balance out regional, cultural, age, gender specificities. How can we ensure inclusion for those students, but also how we can actually look at the quality of education, and how do we give visibility to what they are developing and to what they are learning. We can have some focus, but Carol perhaps could focus on the difficulties concerning indications for this moment of pandemic, and also how we can think about age specificities of development. And Janina could talk about the importance of technology as an educational strategy that will help ensure that, right? And Erica perhaps could share this correlation between access and education. So, following the same order, I will invite Erica first, then Carol, then Janina. So, each one of you will be given 2 minutes in which to speak. So, I will keep time, please. Thank you very much, Juliana. Yes, I believe that we have huge challenges in terms of remote education. And within this group of population, which are adolescents, we believe that this study we have presented, this pilot system, let's put it this way, allow us to come much closer to the reality that those adolescents are living, are experiencing, because they are citizens who can actually share the concerns in this context of pandemic, which affects us all. They are major challenges. They are challenges that we have in the educational system. So we really have to learn how to decipher the context, but also we have to learn how to incorporate that as adults and as education professionals. Sometimes it's difficult for us to listen to teenagers, but it's even more difficult to have greater understanding of their problems concerning the complexity of their lives, for instance. When a child is in the early ages, they have specific responsibilities, which are basically to study, but as adolescents, they will have additional involvement. Many of them have to work, for instance. They have to also support their families. They have to perhaps care for some elderly family member. And school starts to wane in terms of importance in their lives. And those are problems that have to be clarified, that have to come to the surface. So, and that causes a lot of stress, and that places an extra burden, which has influenced what we are developing, what we are trying to develop. So, the authorities would have a good opportunity, and also UNICEF's technical team would get involved with those teenagers to clarify how those concerns that they have can be supported by the system. How can we actually take some space in their decision-making about their own education? So we have been developing this space together with them concerning what they want, and we are likely to find more possibilities of change. We know many of those factors are structural. factors, which have much greater complexity. We will be addressing them little by little, but I do believe that there are social-emotional factors, for instance, convivial factors, gender factors, which come forth in the teenagers' daily lives. And many of those adolescents have to leave school when they are 15 or 16 years old, when they are half through with their secondary education. So these are things that we can do, and an important aspect is to foster dialogue with the teenagers so that we can integrate their proposals of change in order to achieve a more relevant school, more relevant to the needs that they have today. Thank you, Erika. Carol, would you like to speak something? I would actually like to point at what you share in terms of age specificities and learning and access. In Brazil, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this great concern with screens and the number of hours that those children spend in their early childhood. The time they spend in front of those screens without adult support. Screens are often used in an inadequate manner in the process of learning. And as an adult, I need to work, I need to get involved with some activity, and I just place a child in front of a screen to watch a cartoon or a film, or even having access to the internet. So, the screen as an instrument for learning that actually mediates learning is an interesting tool, and it can be used in children's education when it is mediated by a teacher. And that does not match the age group, nor does it match what is expected from children's education, which are plays, games, and frolicking, and what is expected from child education. So how can it be transferred from what happens in the classroom and in-person institutions? How can we transfer that to a remote realm as if it could happen? So the main issue here is to adapt it to the age group, based on an understanding that early childhood kids, when they are in front of a screen, they do require psychological support. They do require adult support to mediate this interaction. And if a family cannot do it, so the children had better do other activities. They had better engage in other plays. They should listen to music or listen to stories. And they are also supposed to help with other tasks involving their family members, brothers, siblings, and parents. Screens are not an adequate format for children's education. 4 hours of interaction, 6 hours of interaction, 7 hours of interaction. We have to be very careful and to have a lot of intelligence in order to make it happen that in a way that it is adequate for each age group. Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. I'll pass the floor to Janina now. Thank you. Well, I'd like to add to what our colleagues have just shared in terms of adolescence. I'd like to share some thoughts about what teenagers represent in terms of the preparation for the future. Only 25% of the world population, but they are 100% of the future. So it is necessary for us to keep thinking about innovative models that will take into account the interests, the themes that are of their interest, to be able to give them a voice, to allow them to participate, but also to ensure that they can develop within a quality educational surroundings with digital skills that can be transferred in a way that they will be able to enter the future with all of those tools and with all of those possibilities that are provided by technology. And in terms of that initiative, because of the context of the pandemic, we should mention again the importance of reducing the digital gap and how the everyday work we have been doing by means of these educational programs contribute to an unfavorable scenario. So those children can have educational possibilities ensured. And this is the final thoughts I would like to share with you. Thank you, Yanina.
Bom, pessoal, eu acho que de tudo que vocês trouxeram,
from everything that you have shared now,
acho que cada vez fica mais evidente,
I think it becomes more and more evidence. The importance of school is ever more important as the space for protection and for conviviality of children and teenagers. You talked a lot about the involvement of students in this construction, both in terms of what has to be taught and in how they should be taught. So we have to think about strategies on which we can develop hybrid and remote education. Those are crucial points to ensure the development of those transferable skills. How can we think about developing competencies, digital, social, emotional competencies, among others? And when we think about adapting to the context, this is also a very important element to ensure continuity and to ensure that those children are still connected to the school. So indeed, it is very important for us to have these discussions. Your experiences help inspire us about hybrid education, remote education, and also to consider this experience that has been brought by the pandemic, which is a big challenge, but it's also lessons that we learn and then can take it to post-pandemic, if we can speak about any post-pandemic. How we can actually reimagine education or recreate school based on this collective construction, where students are part of the core of the creative process, together with the school educators and the school network. I would use this moment to acknowledge the effort of schools and educators in the context of the pandemic, who are making their best efforts on a daily basis in order to maintain children's bonds with the school. There's no time nor moment for those challenges, so I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of those teams who are supporting the schools, which is a very important effort. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for sharing your experiences, which have been very inspiring, that allows us to engage in new possibilities. So thank you, individually and collectively. I would also like to thank you all, those of you who are participating through YouTube connections, and I would like to invite our dear host, Sydney, to please come back and join us in this group. It's a great pleasure for me to join this group of wonderful women who have certainly been able to share inspiration, good experiences, good practices, and actually a lot of opportunity.
Just like Carol, my colleague in Brazil, mentioned, successful school trajectories begin very early in elementary schooling. Peru's experience is aimed at get children from outside the school And in Argentina, we also had, they go to the most remote places where not even technology would reach. And this is very interesting because we see sense, we see meaning in everything we do and what still has to be done, considering the challenges not just of the pandemic, but also the challenge that existed prior to the pandemic. Following the chat, we see the beautiful moment of all the people who are following us more than 3 hours with these two workshops. We had conversations, exchanges, very, very nice experiences, and we'd like to thank all of you who had been with us on the other side of the screen, sharing the experiences, and the ones who were following us through YouTube for all the exchange of information. We'll be back tomorrow with 2 other workshops, and we're going to bring the 2 themes I'm going to mention now to you. This has been very much discussed. First has to do with inclusive education and how this relates with national and international experiences. Thinking inclusive education with for children are challenged in some way, and cultural education, how intercultural education is being offered and worked on in Brazil and in Latin American countries. So we invite you all to be with us tomorrow to follow on this day, the last of our seminar tomorrow. I hope you'll be here with us. I thank you for the participation, all the partners involved, our regional office, the other national offices of UNICEF, of Latin America and the Caribbean, and our office in Brazil, which has really gone to work and brought to fruition the idea of the seminar. Great thanks to Flaxo Brasil, to Porticus, to municipal and state agents in Brazil, our partners who are also following up the seminar with us, bringing a lot of richness to this discussion. We'll have a cultural presentation tomorrow, so be with us. One question that since yesterday has been asked at the chat. The seminar will offer certifications. The certification is going to happen according to the list of enrollment that was received on the 14th through the site. So all of you who followed, who enrolled previously. So if you were enrolled and if you were present, you're going to get the certification. For the ones who are joining us midway, since yesterday, since today, or since tomorrow, we welcome you very warmly so. It is a pleasure to welcome you, but because of control issues of the public, we will not be able to give you the certification if you just present on one day or on another day. So we thank you, and please be with us because your participation is indeed important. It allows all this exchange to happen. So once again, thank you all for being here with us, all the production team behind this great feat of engineering. We don't see, we don't hear them, but without them, this would not be possible. So we have many links, many internet cables, many wireless signals, many things happening, which allow it to happen in Portuguese, in Spanish, and English, and Brazilian Sign Language, and audio description. So we thank our interpreters as well. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Brazilian Standard Time. This UTC -3. UTC -3, International Coordinated Time, based on what we have there in Greenwich, which is located in England. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.